Hello friends, good morning and welcome to the EduSite Network. Our topic of discussion today is part of our ongoing series of lectures on film studies, and friends, today's specific topic is Indian cinema and the partition of India, and this is going to be part 1. This is going to be traced through a trajectory of 3 lectures. So friends, today we start with 1, and to take this further we have with us in our studio subject expert Dr. Manoj Sharma, Assistant Professor, Department of History, Kirori Mal College, University of Delhi. And with this very brief introduction, I welcome sir to the studio. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Very good morning to all the viewers. Today's topic of discussion is Indian films, Indian cinema and the partition of India. As we all know that India became independent in 1947, and at the same time the country was divided into 2 nations, India and Pakistan. And how Indian cinema, the various films which were made in Hindi, in Bengali and in other languages, they try to depict the pain of partition, has been seen in the context of the literature as well, that many of the films, they were also inspired by the literature. Some of the filmmakers, those who were themselves victims of partition in the sense that they had to migrate from either Pakistan to India or from India to Pakistan, they have also written a lot about their partition experiences. And at the same time, those partition experiences which were the part of some of the filmmakers' lives, those who were quite young at that point of time, and later they became filmmakers. So they have also tried to portray that pain of partition in some of the films which they made later. So partition of India in 1947 is considered to be somewhat of a watershed in the Indian history, in the context that so many people from different parts of India, they had to migrate to other parts. For example, from Delhi and other places, so many people, they migrated to Lahore, Karachi, etc. And in the similar vein, a large number of people, they migrated from Lahore and Karachi and other parts of Pakistan to India. So their exodus, in that sense, the sense of rootlessness they felt when they migrated from their own homeland, and even they became refugees. They were even called as refugees, refugee camps, they were being established for them, and how the people, those who were of the same homeland, same motherland, they were being referred to as refugees in their own country. So this kind of pain of partition was there in their own lives. The kind of violence which they experienced during the partition, at the same time how the women, they were being mistreated, and how the bodies of women, they were seen as some sort of a victory for the people, those who were engaged in the partition violence, were some of the experiences which have been shown in certain films. There was a film called Tamas, another film called Khamosh, Pani, where you find certain scenes in which women, they committed suicides by drowning themselves, by jumping into the wells, or by committing other ways how they committed suicide so that they can save themselves from the clutches of the people, those who wanted to ravage their honor. So these kind of experiences of partition, these kind of scenes which were being exhibited in some of the films which were made on partition, they left a lot of mark on the people, those who saw such films. And at the same time, some of the historians also, they have used a lot of literature, they have used some of the personal accounts, so they can write about partition. They have also even interviewed a number of people so that their tales, their stories about their own partition experiences could be known to the other people. So this way, history of partition has been written and rewritten through the personal experiences of the people, those who were the victims of partition. Partition brought the way India and Pakistan, the way they were being created as 2 countries, it was a good thing in the context that it brought some kind of independence to the nations, but at the same time it was tragic in the sense that India was partitioned, and the kind of responsibility which is being given for the partition of India, some of the historians, they have argued that, some of the historians, they say that partition took effect because of the fact that some of the some of the political parties, the main political parties, Congress and the Muslim League, they wanted to have power for themselves. So this has been seen as the one way or one of the focal points because of which partition came into effect. And at the same time, there are others, those who say that British, they were being responsible for the partition of India. The way British, they used communalism as a tool to divide Hindus and Muslims for their own advantage, for their own interest, self-interest. In the similar vein, that demon of communalism grew to such an extent that it could not be contained, because of which we find that how India and Pakistan, they became two nations, and there was a lot of contribution of the political leaders in the sense that they wanted to have power for themselves. So this has been talked about within the context of the partition history, and also at the same time a number of historians, those who have talked about the partition history from the perspective of the political point of view. But at the same time, what we see is that partition history was not only the political history, the personal experiences of the people, those who were affected during the partition of India, how their pain was reflected in some of the films and even in the literature, has also been studied by some of the recent historians. And these recent historians, they have claimed by taking interviews of the people, those who were victims of partition, that this kind of experience lingered on. And even the riot situation, even after the partition of India, after 1947 and thereafter, this riot situation was sometimes linked to the continuing pain of partition. Suvir Kaul is one of the persons who has talked about partition, and he says that the continuing experiences in the sport like cricket, where India and Pakistan, they were playing against each other, the tension in the atmosphere was such that as if the unfinished business of partition will be decided on the field itself. So these were some of the experiences which we have seen over the years, that how such kind of animosity was there on the field, and the contest which was there even in the game of cricket was in a way seen as the lingering tensions of the partition, and it was reduced to in a way some way of a communal or a religious issue. So this way partition has been seen, and at the same time the kinds of violence which took place in the form of riots even after the partition of India has also been studied. And the undercurrents of these riots, they have been examined within the context of partition as well. So this is how the partition history, this is how the issue of communalism, this is how cinema has tried to see these issues, and the filmmakers, they have tried to portray these issues in some way by taking the help of literature, and that has been one of the important mainstays within the history of partition. What we see is that partition, which was a watershed in the modern Indian history, the period which we see thereafter, 18th century has been seen as the period of modern era, mid 18th century, when the Indian history has been divided into ancient, medieval and modern. So the modern period is considered to be from 1757 onwards, and how this history, which is the modern history, in which you find the colonial period, in which thereafter we see that in 1947 there is creation of two nations, India and Pakistan, and how this division was not only a geographical division, but it also widened the chasm in hearts of people. So what we see is that the history of partition, when the historians and the people, those who have studied partition, they don't just consider it as some sort of a geographical division, in the sense that geographical regions, they were being separated into two domains of India and Pakistan, but how it also divided the people, how people, those who had same culture, same languages, same eating and dressing habits, they were being divided, and how even after so many years the people, those who visit Pakistan, or the Pakistani people, those who come to India, they don't see much difference in terms of their cultural practices. So this is how partition experiences created some kind of divisions within the people, and how people, those who were left in Pakistan, they remained Pakistanis, and the people, those who came to India from there, they became refugees in that sense, even though they belong to the same Indian subcontinent. So in that context, modern Indian history provides a lot of paradoxes, in the sense that communalism itself was a paradox, in the sense that it emerged, the origins of communalism could be seen in the colonialism itself. The kind of conditions which were created during the colonial times led to the communal tendencies, as we can see that Hindus and Muslims, they existed during the Mughal period as well, but the kind of differences grew which between the Hindus and Muslims during the colonial period was the result of the policies which were followed by the colonial masters. So what we see is that the modern Indian history period, which begins from 1750s onwards, during this period, during the colonial period, when British, they came to India and they tried to project themselves as the people, those who were superior in nature, and they saw Indians as barbaric, and in that sense they wanted to civilize Indians. The various ideologies with which British were influenced, the various ideological baggage which they had, be it in the form of Orientalism, be it in the form of utilitarianism, be it in form of evangelicalism, all these ideologies, they were not, even if they claimed that British they captured India by sin or crime, but they never rejected the colonial rule in India. They wanted to perpetuate the British rule in India, and they wanted to reform India in such a way, and that is why we see that a number of reforms, they were being introduced in India in the context of law, and how they wanted to reform the Indian society to suit the colonial interest. Even the introduction of the modern education during these times could be seen in this framework, that they wanted to reform India, they wanted to educate Indians about the English literature, English language, so that Indians are able to adapt in a better way to the British situation, British language, British culture, and at the same time they in a way being influenced by the British culture. So what we see is that the partition films which have been made during this particular period, they have a lot of common themes. From the political point of view, partition films do not discuss much, but the way the displacement of the thousands of the masses from their homelands has been shown in some of the films, like Tamas, where you see that how people, they have been displaced, and there is another film called Pinjar, which was made in 2003, and how Pinjar also tries to show the pain of partition, and how the people, those who migrated, they were called refugees in their own homelands. That has also been shown in such films, and the struggle for survival in refugee colonies, that how people, those who migrated, they had to live as refugees in the camps. And it also showcases the trauma of fear, violence, personal pain, loss, and uprooting from the native place. So what we see in the films which have been made on partition, that the various traumas of partition, be it fear or personal pain, how the people, they were being uprooted from their native place, that was shown in the films on the partition, has been one of the mainstays in the context of the films which have been made. So the partition experiences of the people, how they were, these kind of experiences, they were shown on the cinema screen, during different times, beginning from 1949 onwards, when there was a film called Lahore, which was made in 1949, which was dealing with the issue of the women, those who were being abducted, and how they were being kept in the areas by their own abductors, and how these women, they had to either convert to the religion of the people those who had captured, and how they had to in a way leave their own identity and to convert to their religion. So in this way, how women, they were being mistreated during the violence, during the partition violence, and at the same time the kind of fear psychosis which was there among the masses during the partition violence has been shown in some of the films which have been made, be it 1947 Earth by Deepa Mehta, or maybe Pinjar, which was made by director Dwivedi. And at the same time, these kind of personal pain experiences, they were seen in a film called Khamosh Pani, which was made by Sahiba Sumar. So these experiences formed some of the basic mainstays of the films which were made on the theme of partition. The issue of women within the context of the sexuality and the gender relations has also been an important theme within the context of partition. As you can see on the screen as well, that how the women's bodies, they became the site of conflict between two communities, that how women, they were being abducted, how they were being raped, how they were being converted to their own religion, and how they became the members of their the household of their own abductors. So these were some of the issues which have been tackled by some of the historians, recent historians, those who talk about the personal experiences of partition. And women's issues have been central to the partition experiences, because in such kind of conflicts where a lot of violence is being used, women, they became the main target, because they were considered to be some sort of an honor of the family, how women, they represented the honor of a family or a community. So if they will be able to damage women in some way, they will be able to damage the honor of that community. So the bodies of women in a way became the site of contestations, and how this violence was perpetrated on women could be seen in the films as well as literature. Saadat Hasan Manto and some of the other people, those who are associated, Rajendra Singh Bedi, etc., they have Ismat Chugtai, they have written about the partition experiences in their short stories, and they have become quite popular with the masses, those who have read such stories dealing with the issue of partition and the personal experiences of the people, those who were in a way affected by partition. So the politics of partition could be seen in the context that Mushirul Hasan, who is an important historian and who has done a lot of work with regard to the history of partition. So he says that the two-nation theory viewed partition as the logical and inevitable outcome of the irreconcilable opposition between Hindus and Muslims. So what Mushirul Hasan has been arguing is the fact that the two-nation theory which was propagated by the British and the people, those who wanted to divide country, be it Muslim League and the other hardliners, they viewed partition as the logical and the inevitable outcome, in the sense that Hindus and Muslims, they were the two nations, and it was very difficult that they would reconcile. So in that context, two-nation theory became the mainstay of the partition, and how country was divided, and how Muslim League made the demand for partition in 1940 in the Lahore session of the Muslim League. And in a way, there were other people, those who were favoring this kind of demand from different other religions, and they felt that partition was the only solution. And within this context, the political leadership also took a stand in that context, that when British they were trying to divide India, they were also in some way party to this kind of division. and maybe they realized that this was the only solution in the charged atmosphere where Muslim League took to the Deliverance Day, where they took to the streets and they unleashed a lot of violence in 1946. So this was a situation in which you see that not only during and not only at the time of partition, at the time of independence we witness a lot of violence, but at the same time before that and even after the partition of India, during those 2-3 years there was a lot of turbulence and people's exodus, people's emigration from different areas to another areas, it continued. So these were some of the experiences of the people, those who were afflicted with the violence which was perpetrated on them by the people, those who were the supporters of violence. There were some other historians like David Page, Anita Inder Singh, Penderal Moon, G.D. Khosla, Mushirul Hasan, as we have already talked about, and these historians, they have seen partition as a consequence of the policy of divide and rule followed by the imperial masters. So the way British, they followed this policy, and they also see it as a result of the role of Indian Congress, Indian National Congress and Muslim League in supporting the separatist politics and reinforcing communitarian identities around shared values and symbols. So what these historians they have tried to argue in the context of partition is that they see it in the context of the divide and rule policy, that how British, they wanted to divide India and then they rule India, and after the revolt of 1857, as we have seen that British they realized that Hindus and Muslims together would be some sort of a threat to them. So initially they supported the Hindus, and from 1870s onwards they started supporting Muslims, so that some kind of animosity between the two communities, it should develop, and British, they should be able to take advantage of this kind of animosity. So this has been seen by a number of historians, and they talk about the divide and rule policy of the British, so that they are able to create some kind of division between the interests of the Hindus and the Muslims, and how these interests, they could be used by the British to further their own interest. So this was seen by some of the historians, and at the same time how the political parties, they were also not able to contain the kind of violence which was taking place. They were not able to come at some kind of a consensus that how they have to deal with the situation which was really getting out of hand within the context of both the parties, and how they have to deal with the British as well, those who were following such kind of tactics with which they were not able to deal. So these were the issues during the partition, and how the partition experiences, they were not only there within the context of the political sphere, but at the same time how the society, how the culture, how the economy got affected during the partition rights, and how the personal experiences of the people, those who had to migrate from one areas to another, how economically they became quite poor because they had to leave behind whatever they had accumulated over the years by their sheer hard work, and when they came to other parts of their own country where they became refugees, they had to start their lives afresh. So from the economic point of view, what we see is that a number of filmmakers, those who later became filmmakers, they also migrated. B.R. Chopra, Yash Chopra, etc. They were also migrants in the sense that these people, they came from Lahore, and how they started their innings in India, in Bombay, when they came and started their own professional activities within the sphere of films, that could be seen. So what we see is that these migrants in that sense, or the people, those who had come from some parts of Pakistan, they also contributed in that sense that they made their careers in the films, and they had the first hand experience of partition. For example, Bhisham Sahani, who himself had to migrate from Pakistan to India, and who wrote the novel called Tamas, which was later made into a telefilm and which became quite popular, which was based on the partition of India. So, what has been seen within the context of history writing is that there is a lot of emphasis on using the alternate sources, not only the archival material which is there in the libraries or in the National Archives of India, in the other archives in different states of India. Apart from that, what we see is that a lot of material is also there in the form of personal diaries, letters, pamphlets, memoirs, oral sources in the form of interviews, literature, and Indian cinema has also used literature in its depiction of partition experiences. So, what we see is that even in the history writing, where there was a lot of focus earlier on the archival material, that archival material they were considered to be the sources of history writing. What we see is that there is a lot of focus now on the personal diaries as well, that during the experiences of partition, the people, those who wrote their own personal experiences, that has also been studied by some of the historians. And at the same time, the personal letters, they have also become some source of the history of partition, in the sense that the personal experiences of people, they were being written in their letters, and that kind of correspondence was also studied from the historical point of view. The pamphlets and memoirs of the people, those who were in a way the victims of partition, or those who had seen partition, has also been studied in the recent times, that in some of the pamphlets how the communal passion that was being incited by the people, those who were in a way communalist in nature. So, that has also been studied by some of the historians in the recent times, and how literature has also contributed in the context that literature has also expressed the point of view which was of the people during that particular period of history when partition took place. So, some alternative kind of sources within the context, they have been used for history writing of partition in the way that the partition experiences, they form some sort of a sources within that context, and at the same time the archival material can not be the only source from which we have to write history. That has been attempted by some of the historians during the later times, and how the literature, it also forms the source material because of which not only the history of partition has been written, but at the same time how films, they have also been made on some of the literature which has been produced by the people, those who have been writing literature on partition. Stanley Walpert is one of the historians, and he has talked about the British abdication of responsibility to deal with the already volatile situation which led to the death and destruction in the communal inferno of partition. This was the shameful flight which was reflective of their true character, when they felt no responsibility if they had no profits to achieve. And this also shows the British ideological orientations. So, what we see is that the British history, the imperialist school, they have always tried to show that British, they were very civilized. British, they had this kind of white man's burden to civilize the natives, and they were doing a lot of responsible work in India. They were contributing to India in all the possible positive ways. But when you see the rule of the colonial times during the 200 years of colonial rule, the way the British, they tried to exploit the Indian economy through the drain of wealth, a lot of money which was drained out of India, and how Indians, they were being exploited at all levels, that no modern industries, they were being initiated by the British, even though industrial revolution had already taken place in Britain in 18th century, but no such industries, they came up in India. They tried to exploit Indians in every possible way through the kind of natural resources which India had, and all the kinds of resources which India had apart from the natural resources, British tried to exploit Indians in every way. So Stanley Wolpert, he has talked about that how British, they ran away from their own responsibility when India needed them during the times when the violence broke out. Initially it was understood that British, they will leave India by 1948, June 1948, but they flee from India in August 1947, and no special arrangements were made during this particular period. If the administration would have been more efficient, if the care would have been taken to contain the violence, then such scale of violence would not have taken place. During that particular period, even British forces, they were more ready to leave out of India, because now they did not have anything to gain from India. Whatever benefits which they could have taken, they had already taken, and they were not even interested within that context that they have to take more benefits from India. So that way, this abdication of responsibility is seen within the context of the shameful flight, that how shamefully they ran out of India. And it also showed their true character in the sense that British, whatever ideological orientations they had and whatever ideological excuse which they might have used to show that they were more civilized, they were more concerned about Indians, but in reality when time came to salvage or to save the Indian people during the partition of India, they might have known that such kind of violence will definitely take place, because the kind of the demon of communalism which they had unleashed because of the policies of divide and rule which was followed by them would be seen within the context of partition, should have been realized by the British, but they did not realize, or maybe if they would, maybe even if they realized, they did not take any kind of steps so as to contain the violence and save so many people from the kind of violence which was perpetrated on them. So this British abdication of the responsibility was an important concern during that particular period, and which hurt the Indians during this time. So the term shameful flight was used by Winston Churchill, who was the opposition leader in the debate in the British House of Commons. And in this debate, when the Labour's Independence Bill it was introduced by the Labour government of Clement Attlee, and Winston Churchill used this term that this has been some sort of a shameful flight by the British, and later it was in a way realized also. In the context of boundary commissions, the way India and Pakistan they were being created, there was a commission which was initiated or established by the British to divide India and Pakistan, as you can see on the screen as well. And Sumit Sarkar is one of the historians who has talked about partition, and he has argued that the apathy in a way and the dereliction of duty of the British could be seen during this particular period, and the boundary commission which was appointed, one for Punjab, another one for Bengal, and it was headed by a British lawyer, Cyril Radcliffe, and who did not knew about the Indian conditions or the Indian geography. He was not even aware about the Indian conditions and geography, and the way partition was done without keeping in mind the Indian conditions was another blow, in that sense that some of the Muslim majority areas they came to India, and some of the Hindu majority areas they went to Pakistan. And in that context, what we see is that a lot of mess was made in terms of dividing the region, the two countries of India and Pakistan. The border areas, the way they were being affected during this particular period was also reflective, in the sense that there was a lot of violence when the people they migrated from one area to other through the borders. So what we see is that the manhandling of the situation by the British, in the context that the appointment of the boundary commissions, the people those who were appointed, they did not knew about the conditions and the geography, and the way they affected or made the division also hurt the people in all the ways. So that has also been criticized by some of the historians, and this has been seen or shown in the films which have been made on them. So what we see in the context of partition was that there was a lot of violence and the terror during this particular period, and the vulnerability of women during this particular period, that women how they were seen as more and more vulnerable within the context of the patriarchal norms, that how men, they have been the breadwinners, how in the patriarchal society women, they are seen to be in the periphery, and how the honor of women that was being used by the people, those who became the perpetrators of violence during the partition experiences. So Urvashi Butalia, she has done research on this area, and Begum Anis Kidwai's work Azadi Ki Chhaon Mein has also been written within that framework, and Begum Anis Kidwai has talked about the various camps which were established in Delhi. Purana Kila was one of the camps which was established, and in those camps how such a pathetic condition for the people, those who had migrated, was there, that there were no special provisions for them, and how these people, they suffered in the camps which were established for them. And so many people, those who migrated, many of them, they died during the exodus or during the process of migration. So this has also been seen. So what we see is that Ritu Menon, Kamala Bhasin, Urvashi Butalia, Begum Anis Kidwai, all of them, they have talked about all these kind of issues which were related to the women, and how women, they were being maltreated during this particular period of time. What we also see is that Kamalaben Patel's work, Mool Suta Ukde, Torn from the Roots, who was a social worker, who was associated with retrieval of women who were abducted during partition, and around 75,000 women, they were abducted and raped during the carnage of partition. Women were particularly wronged as they were symbols of community honor. Penderal Moon, who was one of the historians, has suggested that by March 1948, 4.5 million Hindus and 6 million Muslims became refugees. So what we see is that these are huge numbers. When we are talking about the personal experiences, even a single person is too valuable for one particular family. So when the numbers are so large, we are talking of 45 lakhs, we are talking of 60 lakhs, we are talking of 75,000. So these are huge numbers where people were affected, and when these people, they were affected, what we see is that how the families of the people, those who were directly affected, the people, those who had to migrate, they had to start from scratch. So the personal loss in the form of killings, that how people, they were being killed, and at the same time, apart from killing, what we see is that the cultural loss in the context, that the people, they felt that they have become rootless in the context, that their cultural ethos, it had been uprooted. And some of the films, though they were not directly made, but indirectly they were talking about all these kind of issues. Ritvik Kumar Ghatak, he made a number of films in 1950s and 60s, and his films, they reflect the trauma of partition in this context. His films, they show that how the cultural rootlessness, when he had to migrate from East Bengal to the West Bengal, and how the cultural ethos of Eastern Bengal, which was close to his art, was absent where he had to migrate. This could be seen in this particular period. So, all these kind of issues which were associated, they were not only associated with the violence, with the personal experiences, but at the level of collective experiences, that so many people, they were being devoid of their homes, so many people, those who lost their lives, so many people, they had to undergo a new kind of life experience, was very huge. The numbers were very huge in the context of partition. What we also see is that during the violence against women, the women, they jumped into wells, as already been talked about, to save their lives and to save their honor from the men of other religions and communities. So, that was being shown in some of the films, and portrayal of such a scene in a film called Tamas, which is darkness, which was made in 1987. It gave some sort of an iconic significance to such scene. Khamosh, Pani was another film which was made in 2003, and this film also shows a scene or depicts such a scene where people committed suicide in such a way or contemplated to die, so that they jumped into the wells. So, all these kind of films which were talking about such kind of experiences of the people, that how they became so much depressed that they wanted to take away their own lives, this kind of feeling which came into them that they do not have to survive in such conditions, was one of the extreme things which we see during the partition. And this kind of violence on the women during this particular period, in which they want to save themselves, and they also want to save themselves in the context that they may be converted to other religions, and they may be forced to live within those marriages, those forced marriages, where they will be forced to go into the conversions and marriages. Pinjar and Khamosh, Pani were two films which were dealing with this issue, as you can see on the screen. That Khamosh, Pani and Pinjar, both of them, as we have discussed, and how in both the films women, they were raped and then they were married into, they had to marry their perpetrators, they were being converted to their religion, and then finally they settled with them. They lost their identity and they lost their blood relations for their survival. So, what we see is that the continuing kind of violence not only at that point of time when they were raped, but at the same time the violence of forcible conversion, that they had to convert to the religion of their perpetrators, and then again they had to settle with them. They had to make peace with this kind of situation where they have to live with their perpetrators all through their lives. And how they lost their identity, women, the identity of the women in the context that now maybe their names were changed, so they lost the identity of their name. Maybe they had to change their religion, definitely they had to change their religion, so their identity of religion, that was changed. They had to stay at a place, so they lost their identity of the region, and at the same time they lost their identity of their nation or country, because they had to live in a country where they did not want to live. So, this question of identity within that context, that was also lost to them, and they also lost their blood relations. Women, with whom they grew over a period of time, their brothers and sisters, their parents, their other family members. So, all these people, they were lost to these women, and they had no contact with them, and they had to reconcile with their own life in the new surroundings. So, that was those were some of the themes which have been tackled in some of the films which have been made, and how within the patriarchal system women, they were considered that they will reconcile with those kind of conditions, and they have no particular wishes of their own, and they have to abide by the wishes of the people with whom they are living. So, these kind of experiences of the women within the constraints of the gender norms of the society have also been explored by the people, those who have studied partition. So, the focus on women or on the gender relations during the partition has been one of the important themes during the recent times. What we see during the partition is that Mahatma Gandhi, who was a 77-year-old man, and at that time he was going to different parts of India, and he was convincing or trying to convince the people that they should not indulge in violence. And even at the time of independence, when India became free, Gandhi was in one of the villages of Bengal called Noakhali, and he was trying to douse the fire of partition. Gandhi realized Gandhi was not in the favor of partition, and there were so many others, and at the same time Gandhi was a staunch secularist in the sense that Hindu-Muslim unity was very close to his heart, and the various movements of Gandhi, be it the non-cooperation movement or the civil disobedience movement or the Quit India movement, which were the major movements which were launched by Gandhi. In all these movements and the other movements which were launched by Gandhi, Gandhi had talked about the Hindu-Muslim unity. A number of his supporters were the nationalist Muslims, and at the same time what we see during this particular period, that he was trying that the communal frenzy and the communal situation in the country should not go to such an extent that it is unable to be controlled by the people, those who are there in the administration and the other spheres. And what Ramchandra Guha, who has talked about Gandhi, he says that in a tour of 7 weeks, Gandhi walked around 116 miles, and he addressed nearly 100 village meetings. So, Gandhi, even at that age when he had to rest, was and India had attained independence, even then he was not at rest, and he was visiting different parts of the country in the remote areas, so that Gandhi at that time was one of the worst affected areas with the communal violence, and he did not want that people they should indulge in any kind of communal activity where there is a lot of violence and bloodshed. So, these were the movements of partition with which a lot of political leadership was also involved, but at the same time the father of the nation who was there, and he realized the kind of danger which the communal forces and communalism will unleash. Communalism, the word has been used time and again, and it is generally a very paradoxical term. It is seen to be one of the major dividing force in the 20th century. It was responsible for the partition of India in 1947. Bipan Chandra, as you can see on the screen, argues that communalism is a belief or an ideology which operates at 3 fundamental elements or stages, one following the other. So, Bipin Chandra, one of the historians who has talked about communalism, he is an important historian in the modern Indian history context, and talked about the various ideology or ideas within the framework of partition. So, he says that communalism was a paradoxical term in the sense that the way communalism developed during the colonial rule, and the colonial situation provided the fodder for the development of communalism, and how British they created such conditions that this kind of situation of communalism it developed in the country, and how it also led to the division of India and Pakistan was and how communalism was also responsible for the division of India and Pakistan. And what we see is that when India and Pakistan they became two countries, the kind of violence which was unleashed was also in a way unparalleled in the history of the world, in the sense that it was such a situation where people they became mad with their own frenzy and their own prejudices, and but at the same time we cannot say that not all people were such, and many people they also saved others. But at the same time the kind of figures which we had, the kind of data which we have, that how people they migrated, how people they were being affected, and their own personal experiences as they tell us, it was one of the major problems during the period. The violence was a major problem during the period of the partition. So the first stage of communalism, it propagates the view that the followers of one religion they have similar secular interest. That is, any one religious community shares the identical socio-economic, political and cultural interest. It was suggested that a Hindu landlord and a Hindu landless labor had similar interest because both were Hindus, or Muslims or Sikhs as the case may be. In this way it emphasizes idea of socio-political communities based on religion. So Bipin Chandra he says that in the first stage or the phase of communalism, followers, it has been argued that the followers of one religion have similar secular interest. Secular interest in the context that the interests which are not religious, and these secular interests are the socio-economic, political and the cultural interests. So in this way what we see is that this kind of idea takes shape, that they have similar secular interests, and it was suggested that a Hindu landlord and a Hindu landless labor they will have similar, and it was similar for other communities like Muslims and the Sikhs. But it was not a correct situation, because everybody will have the same secular interest. It will not come down to the religion, as we will talk about it later. And it was talking about those socio-political communities which were based on religion. So communalism was generally based on religion, though it was more of a political kind of issue, but it was shown to be an issue which was more based on religion. So that was one of the flaws which was to be seen in the ideology of communalism. So that has been argued by Bipin Chandra. In the second stage of communalism, in which what we see is that communal ideology is based on the idea that secular interest, that is the socio-economic, political and cultural interests of adherents of one religious community are different from interests of adherents of another religion. It implies that all Muslims had dissimilar interests from all Hindus and vice versa. So this is the second stage of communalism as talked about by Bipin Chandra, and he says that that it is based on the idea that secular interests of one religious community are different in the first stage, and in the second stage there is a difference in the context of degree, and now they are talking about the kind of differences in the interests from this first stage, the kind of changes which have come in the second stage. And what we see is that all Muslims they had dissimilar interests from all Hindus and vice versa, but that was not to be the situation, because the secular interests of both the communities, be it the Hindus or the Muslims, they were same. Bipin Chandra then further argues in the final stage of communalism. Bipin Chandra says that the secular interests of the adherents of various religions are mutually incompatible and hostile. So the stage reaches to such an extent that it has been argued that one particular religious community and the other particular religious community, their interests are mutually incompatible and hostile. And at this stage they argue that two communities, Hindus and Muslims, they cannot exist in harmony with each other, and their interests are antagonistic to each other. So religion decides the kind of secular interests of a community, and it becomes some sort of a factor in the identity of an individual. So what we see that during all these three kind of stages in which Bipin Chandra has talked about the kind of changes which are taking place. In the third stage, we talk about the kind of antagonism. So that kind of antagonism which even did not exist would be seen as one of the important constituents of communalism, and this kind of situation will naturally lead to all kinds of violence. The films which have been made on these kind of situation will be discussed in the next lecture, which we will have in the on Monday. Till then, have a good time.
Thank you so much, sir, and also it's very nice of you to sum it up and also let our viewers know what we are going to be talking about in our following lecture, which is on Monday. We are going to take this further to the part 2 of the same Indian cinema and the partition of India. We are going to talk more about it. So friends, I hope that you will be keen on watching all these 3 lectures that we have planned in the series. So thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much, sir, for being here. Have a wonderful day ahead.